This has been wonderful, and I'm going to do what in stand-up comedy is called paddling now for a couple of minutes while the stage is being rearranged. I think this gives a lot of opportunity now to actually get to what this whole lecture series was about, namely the futures. I love that your statement that we are so poor at identifying or thinking of alternative futures. And this is where we are now, in a moment where the future is no longer inscribed into this space-time of cartography and chronology where things go from the archaic to the modern, but there's another opportunity. Gaia is, I think you've called it the true other, our true other, this thing that we cannot know. And the part of the reason why we cannot know this other is because the we that seeks to know it is a we in search of itself, I think you've called it, that the we that we used to imagine, the globe and the land through was a we that was delusioned, I suppose one could call it, had a false consciousness of oppositions between them and us, between human and non-human. And what happens if one tears that apart? I think so. The relationship between, I think, the remaking of the humanities as a way of thinking differently about the world is actually also a different form of future thinking, I suppose. I thought we could call it the third attractor lecture series from here on. I don't know what you want to, if that's a good idea. Futures will do for the moment. I'm so happy to be able to perhaps continue what you've called the work of diplomacy here, and I'm pleased that to have two eminent diplomats here on stage with me. One is Isabelle Stengers, Professor Isabelle Stengers, and Professor ANDREAS ROEPSTORFF. They will be what one might call in charge of affairs. I think the French is chargé d'affaires, diplomats who will take the first step in trying to do that work of diplomacy, which is avoiding destruction at the hands of imagined differences. And I think you've given us some of the problems in imagined differences before. How to avoid war, I suppose, is the work of diplomacy. And if I can introduce you to them, none of them need introduction for different reasons, but Isabelle Stengers, or Isabelle Stengers, depending on where you come from, is professor at the Department of Philosophy and Ethics at the Université Libre in Bruxelles. She has a background in chemistry and has for decades worked to promote a politically critical science of critical zones, I suppose one could call them, a kind of science that transcends the borders of natural and human sciences. Another science, she has insisted for a long time, is possible. And this insistence goes way back to 1984, when she co-wrote the book Order Out of Chaos with Nobel Prize recipient Ilya Prigozhin. Isabelle Stengers is also an honorary doctor of Aarhus University from 2012, I believe. I think.
Yes.
Oh, well, and she gave the keynote, a really interesting keynote lecture at the Danish STS conference earlier today. And I'm so grateful that DAST wants to lend Isabelle Stengers to us, and that you are able to be here today in a busy schedule of conferencing. ANDREAS ROEPSTORFF holds a joint professorship in the faculty with the Faculty of Arts and the Faculty of Health at Aarhus University. He has a double degree, very appropriate for this talk, in anthropology and in biology, and is director of the Interacting Minds Center, a research institute that tries to combine natural research, natural science experimentation, but also other forms of experimentation with human science critical reflection. He has been awarded several honors, including just last year, the Carlsberg Foundation Research Award. He studied nationalism in Lithuania, halibuts in Greenland, those flatfish, and a science lab in London. And he's beginning a new project on play, suitably funded by Lego. He's also followed the work of Bruno Latour longer than anyone I know. And to start off the debate, and I really hope there will be time, and I know we have an hour left, so there will be time for questions also from the floor in about half an hour or so, if you agree. And can I start with you, ANDREAS? You have called Bruno Latour the James Bond of science studies. Maybe that's a good place to start.
I think it's probably not just the James Bond of science studies. Remember what James Bond is. It's a 007, right? There is a license to do something that many other people are doing. It's kind of going in and putting small devices in that just explodes the world so that it looks really differently from before. I think this was how I first experienced reading Latour many years ago, and I thought this was also what we saw today. But I think there is kind of a democratic sense to it, so it's not just the kind of going in himself and blowing up stuff. I think where it has been really important is there is also like a licensing to others as well. At least that's how we usually teach it, that kind of in the hands of, or with the blessings of Latour, we all become O agents who can go out and kind of map out territories in ways that it could not be done beforehand. And that kind of feeling of, you know, where should we look for agency? It can be in people, it can be in door stoppers, it can be in things, it can be in animals, has opened up a really important territory. So my first question to you, Bruno Latour, would be, is it so that what we really need in the world today are more special agents rather than diplomats or generals?
I'm lost with your metaphor of a special agent. I was already lost with the hemorrhoid, and now I'm completely lost.
I should have said toad. I know.
Who is sending the agent? I mean, what's the authority? I'm not sure I understood the question actually.
I guess the question is that these days we don't really know who is sending the agent, but there seems to be agents fighting for some causes. It used to be, you know, the country or the globalization, but what we need today is that agents fighting for the earth instead.
Well, I think the military metaphor of spying doesn't work very well in this situation. What I'm interested in, for example, take one of the, we don't have the image anymore, but if we go on sorting out this quasi-dialectical, the notion of agency was limited in the middle period, which is the modernist things, where agency was supposed to be for humans, I mean, as everyone in the social sciences, but if you were adding agency to non-humans in chemistry or in biology, you immediately shifted to a sort of para-scientific or pre-scientific sort of illusion. And now I think it's very interesting to work with scientists and activists who are multiplying agencies in ways where immediately they are not split into agency as representation and agency as objective, so to speak. So the word agency has actually shifted in part for my work, but not only, for the work of anthropologists to describe also ontological features of words. And I think that's what changed. So I've lost the metaphor of 007, which never struck me as a very intelligent political mind, but a good killer. But I don't think I sympathize with that. But what is really interesting is that agency can now describe in a very different ways. And we were discussing with you about witchcraft, a subject of great interest to Isabelle. On Earth, that is on Gaia, on this little ring of critical zone, it's much more difficult now to dismiss preemptively someone by saying it just subjectively in your head. So now the multiple ontology, so to speak, could become acceptable, and that's where diplomacy counts. So the metaphor of diplomacy is strong. Mm-hmm. The metaphor of spying, not so. I mean, it's more difficult for me to respond to the, the greatness of spying. Besides, James Bond is 007 is Brit, and they are going to disappear anyway because they go to the Brexit. So no one will pay any attention to them anymore. There will be no further 009 film. That would be my view.
Isabelle, what is your most burning question to Latour?
Okay, well, I love to criticize or say not enough, but today it's more difficult than usual. I think there has been a jump in concreteness, you know. Today it's an event, to my mind. So I will try anyway. It seems to me that, well, I saw the shade of what could be a danger. It is not in your talk, but in the way it could be relayed. And we are living in a dangerous world where very often the stronger relaying agency is the worse. We take the more dangerous part and even activate danger where it was not meant to be dangerous. And it is this difference between the made-up land, pseudo-identities, and the earthly ones of the third pole. It could be used in terms of judgment. This is made-up identities. Go back to. So it seems to me that what we deal with some activists, and here I would speak about the witches from whom I learned so much, I would call them resurgent identity. It's not back to the past. It is experimenting with and trying to go on and to reactivate things of the past which have been destroyed. So it's more, I would say, reinvention in a completely different context. And I think there must be a lot of precaution in front of the idea of made-up identity. It's what I find very, very compulsive. In contrast, is this idea I would call of generativity of physis. You may make the difference between made-up identities protecting against outside danger and resurgent identity through the kind of generativity with which they experiment. So that's a proposition, and an addition would be maybe what is more disturbing with saying goodbye to scalability. It should be warranted to work at any scale and with any people, anonymous people, any teacher. We have to give the rule of teaching which are good for any teacher in front of any children and all that, is that it means saying goodbye to scalability means a measure of accepting the risk and trusting the capacity of learning locally. And it means that there is no ready-made solution which would evacuate the question. And I think that saying goodbye to scalability and all the warrants that it will work at any scale, it's a version of what Haraway tells us about learning to stay with the trouble. And I think that those earthly this earthly third pole is meant to have us staying with the trouble, even if we are grasping the barrel. The story is not over. Well, he succeeds since he wrote the story, but I'm not sure we will be able to write the story, but it's not interesting.
Do you want to respond?
No, can I ask a question?
Yeah, why not?
On the first point, I agree entirely, of course. On the second point, I want to understand, because the test which I try to make with these three things is always to remember what's lost and what's gained every time you say. So I didn't understand what would be lost by losing scalability.
But in fact, I think that there may be a third version of the idea of protection. When public order is concerned, or when what is rational is concerned, it usually means we must produce programs which will be protected against the stupidity, against the self-centeredness of people. Normal people are not to be trusted. They will abuse. So we must produce things which are protected against that. And the measure of trust is we have to trust people, but what are the conditions which produce both the trust and all that? But the point is that we have to leave away the protection of scalability. It works whatever the people.
On the first point, I think it's very important that one way of getting some of the poison, so to speak, of the ecology is precisely that the third attractor is entirely reinvented as well. So of course it's not moving, because that would be a re-archaization. It's not moving from a sort of, and it's very clear when you study the politics of park, and you must have the same here, where in France the park actually made a lot of humans as well. The national park, only one of them has no human in it. So of course the wilderness, the whole question of wilderness, which is a cliché of history of science as well as STS, it would share a need. That's where we need a sort of shibboleth to describe the well-made identity from the sort of badly made identity. We knew that, but I think it complicates and opens up the question when you have three ways of making this identity. So it's not the same if you invent a saucisson, which would be a local saucisson, which would be exactly the same as the other saucisson, except it would be a local saucisson. It's a big issue in France with the what is called the protected name of things. And I think you have also some of those here in Denmark, some of those disputes. So every single of these reattachment to this free pole has a different definition of what it is to invent identity. And we should try to fine-tune to be able to differentiate. Because every day, every time we read the paper, we do actually this selection between what seems to go this way, or this way. The problem is that it's very difficult to have a political position which is arguable if you don't define the land, the soil on which this, the horizon on which this is going. And the ecologists did as if we already knew something about the Earth. And what is so striking in the work of the new natural historian, as you would say, and the group of Anna would say, is that we suddenly realize how different the land, the Earth is from the globe. And it's not even seen. We try with some of our students and in the exhibition in Karlsruhe to make the distinction between 2D and 3D. So one of the work of art is by Pierre Huyghe, who is a French artist, and it says it's called Giverny translated, and it is actually an impressionist painting because he took the soil from Giverny of Monet, except it's an aquarium with lots of fish in it that you see, but sometimes you see nothing. So it's actually built a 3D view of a fragile, sometimes invisible ecosystem. And then you measure the distance between Impressionism and 2016 art form. And it's one of its many ways in which you can begin to feel that landing down is not at all the same thing as the sort of, for example, the vanguard history of art.
Yes, and it's something which I think is so very important because the modernization funds very often produce the idea that, well, some things are destroyed, but what has been destroyed can be recomposed. If you can do it, you can make it, unmake it, and all that. And there is different, what Deleuze calls, Gilles Deleuze, the philosopher, calls différence de nature between destroying, disentangling, and reproducing new entanglement, regenerating. I think one you can destroy without even knowing it. Galileo, when he disentangled one motion the one from which he would be able to learn and to tell. From the others, he had no impression of destroying anything. He was just purifying, analyzing. But in order to regenerate or reactivate entanglements and generativity coming from entanglement, you have to practice art of paying attention, noticing, not imposing your goodwill, not trusting goodwill, negotiating with not submissive force, being ready with surprise, learning. And it's something which to me is very important. It's that this term learning, learning with, learning from, and all that, it's one of the words the less used in philosophy.
Andreas?
Only Leibniz spoke about learning, but...
Who did?
Leibniz.
Leibniz.
But Kant, you don't learn anything, everything is your head. And all that. Sartre, you don't learn. No, learning is absent.
So I thought maybe if we go with this very beautiful metaphor of the third attractor, the Earth, as a non-scalable, a realistic, objective multiplicity. Now, what I would like to hear your both opinion on is now, what do we do with time, or what do we do with the past in terms of its agency? Because we can say from the global perspective, or from the local perspective, from the land, the past is everything. And from the global perspective, traditionally, the past is absolutely nothing. But it seems that neither everything nor nothing is really capturing the importance of pasts for experimenting with the kind of presence that we live in the current moment. So how do we deal then with the past from this third attractor, the Earth, this non-scalable, realistic, objective multiplicity?
Well, we now have three past. The past, the past of a modernist future, which has absolutely no relation whatsoever with the first past. Every anthropologist knows that. But when you try to imagine what were the people who were not modern, they were, of course, not archaic. I mean, this is a cliché of anthropology since, at least, Lévi-Strauss. And the new past, I don't know if it's better, would be something where precisely there is no past, in the sense that simultaneously you would have, for example, if you take agriculture now, people who are disputing the Dane model of agriculture in France, they would say, if we resist the gigantic farm with 1,000 pigs, we are not going to the other past, archaizing farm. We are inventing a non-scalable, I mean literally, a non-scalable, non-plantatiocene type of things, and we, of course, invent lots of things about Brittany and invented tradition about Brittany, because this is what happened in Brittany. And we try to find a way, but precisely the way was not found, because it's a very clear case. The only thing that the French agriculture ministries told these guys who were on strike was, do like the Danes and modernize yourself. Because now, as I said, the Dane is sort of the hill, the city on the hill now, the new city on the hill. And this is completely a poison for the people, because what do you do when you are said, have farms of 1,000, and every single other way is archaized. So it's very important to be able to say, I mean, if there is one notion which is infected or inflected by the modernizing front, is the word past. So, and it's immediately when I say that, immediately I hear, you want to go back to the past. You are reactionary. Which, of course, I am a reactionary. But the question is to what you react and where you move. And as long as you have this only vector, a reactionary is always easy to detect, because a reactionary is going there. But what if you are a reactionary going there? A reactionary and an activist begin to look different. And that's what I'm trying to articulate. And of course, agriculture is an ideal case, because it's where everybody is. I was on a farm recently, and there are people who were talking about a postmodern hedge. there was the old hedge which had been cut, then there was the postmodern hedge, or high-tech hedge with dozens of new things in it. But I'd like to hear how Isabelle will answer to the...
Well, I will give... time is a very complicated thing, so I will protect myself behind a philosopher, which is my... the one who is more important for me, who is Whitehead. For Whitehead, the past is what we have to inherit one way or another. Whatever we do in the present is inheriting the past, but what matters, what is to be thought, is how we inherit it. There is no conformity, or there is no freedom from the manner in which we inherit is invention. Whatever the past, we inherit it through invention. But how do we honor the invention? Or do we present it as a disqualification or as a conformity? This is a question of cultivating the idea of inheriting the past with the question.
But innovation and cultivation, would that be the same? Because it seems that the innovation will immediately pull us towards this, upper attractor. So is it a cultivation rather than innovation? Is that the metaphor?
Let's say that for Whitehead, whatever we do, we innovate one way or another. But we can innovate through disqualifying. This is modern, this is rupture, we have nothing to learn from the past, we are out of it, yes, thank you. But we can honor the question of how to inherit it. Open the question and honor it, give it importance. And this would be cultivation.
My chief job today is to dumb everything down a little bit, and if I could do that by, asking you to be a little bit more concrete about what Gaia is, because if the whole problem is that we're strung out between these infernal alternatives between the globe and a land that is all full of problems too, politically and analytically and existentially, then what Gaia is seems to me to be really important, and you've been multiplying words in order to describe it, Gaia and Ge, etc. I was wondering is there any way to be a little bit more concrete? And just as a warm-up, maybe, you mentioned in one of your texts that the best example you could think of for Gaia comes out of a Lars von Trier movie, Melancholia, where I realize there are two globes, so it's a problem. But there's the planet of Melancholia that swallows up the Earth in that last ending scene. The movie has been described both as an artsy film about the apocalypse, but it's also been described as a psychological drama about depression. It seems to me that Gaia is the possibility of thinking Gaia is both a result of a history of ecological disaster, but also, is it also a zeitgeist? Is there a zeitgeist? Is there like a moment in which it is now possible to think Gaia that was not possible in the 80s when globalization seemed to work?
I mean, this would require a long time, and Isabelle has much as to say about it. My version of Gaia is that it's a sort of layers and layers and layers of different things, starting with the name, which suggested to if you call it Earth system science, you have a completely different set of association. If you talk it like the Earth, you have another one. If you talk of Gaia as a New Age goddess, you still have another one. So I think we have to accept the idea that Gaia is all of these things, layered, and it gives another entry. I give you a simple answer, is that now I'm in the habit, when I talk to geochemists, geopoliticians, etc., to ask, are you a Gaia chemist, or a Gaia grapher, or a Gaia politician, etc.? And the simple difference between these two words, which are exactly the same in Greek, makes a nice shift. because everything which was stabilized and simplified in geography, geology, etc., which means the background and foreground, the human in the foreground on the background, is perturbated. So whatever Gaia is, it's a redistribution of the agencies of foreground, background. And this is why I did a play on Gaia, because precisely this is ideal for a play. I mean, this is also a bit of a play, but it was the most complicated play. Because it's exactly the sort of thing you can approach from mythology, from science, from Earth system science, etc., etc. But it direct attention. So, of course, the fact that it's new and arrives is probably part of the zeitgeist, but we should not forget that this is from the 60s. So it is a sort of belated zeitgeist. And the way I use it is it's up for grabs. I mean, Gaia is up for grabs. But it's not nature. And that's a central point. And it's not creation, which is another very important problem for theology.
Maybe this is a good time to bring in the audience.
Just to add, is that no nature, but physis was nature for the Greeks.
It was a long time.
Before Galileo kidnapped one kind of motion and forget about all the rest.
And what Isabelle says before is, I think, very important, is that what Galileo did, you cannot redo it by adding the lived word on top of Galileo. And if there is a zeitgeist, from my understanding of what the science, the natural science are doing now, is exactly that. But it's not adding life on the movement in a sort of superficial sort of remediation. Yes. There is no way to remediate. But there is a new entanglement, and this is why the word of Gaia I like most is multifolded. Which is, by the way, an old term of mythology. The multifolded Gaia is actually a Greek epithet of his name.
And if I may add, just I think what we have to get out also is analytics view holism. Because Gaia is not a figure of holism. Because there is no unifying point of view, even internal. Multifolded means there is indeed no good point of view from which to understand even internal, not from nowhere, but...
Gaia is not scalable.
Yes, not scalable. Neither the whole, but at each scale it's complicated.
I think we should take a question from the floor, if there is one.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, all of you. I have a very quick question. I wonder if the point of view that the four of you have been discussing isn't quite Eurocentric or perhaps European and North American-centric. And I wonder if how these dichotomies you're discussing and what they mean to us would look differently from a Chinese or Indian or Arab point of view, especially as they've become much more wealthy and much more politically powerful in one lifetime, while a lot of the anxieties behind what you're discussing is the lack of a comparative wealth and political power for Europeans and North Americans. Thank you.
Well, my talk is unabashedly Eurocentric, because that's where the prime comes from. So, and then it has been extended, of course, but the difficulty of meeting other collectives when you are a modernist is the prime nowadays. And that's why I call the exhibition in Karlsruhe Reset Modernity, using the metaphor of reset, which has its own difficulty. So it's very important to be Eurocentric, so that you can actually extract the poison, which makes absolutely impossible to consider positively and in terms of multiple agency the alternative world which are inhabited. Also for another reason, which is very beautifully illustrated in a book by a young anthropologist called Nastasia Martin, who studied a nation in north of Alaska, which is called Les âmes sauvages. I hope it will be translated in English. it's very, for me, in the same league as Anna Tsing's book, because it's exactly the problem of the difficulty of the ecologist, of a missionary, of the administrators to understand anything about what it is to live in the ruins of Occidentalization. And it's exactly the problem why I think the whole project, my project on inquiry into mode of existence is, again, completely Eurocentric. Because that's where the difficulty of just registering the other way of inhabit the world never cut ice, because constantly they are pushed to the first attractor. All those nice way of living in the past, all this, etc. So the bon sauvage argument is built in that, and as long as we don't say, okay, we share the same situation, of course, as you said, very light, much more dramatically, you and us, but we now have the same whirlwind, the same maelstrom under our feet, and we can enter into a collaboration in anthropology, and I think you would agree with that, which would be unthinkable before. I mean, you lose your ground, we are beginning to lose our ground as well. How do you do? How do you do is not the same thing as before. How do you do with Dr. Livingstone, I presume? But now it would be, you lose ground, we are losing ground as well. And how do we cope? So coping, to use again Anna's argument about ruins, is, I think, something which establishes, and I think precisely the dispute about is it Eurocentric or not is completely understandable by people. I mean, it's time to put some order in your own house. And that's my project in anthropology of the modern. And
Gaia is also the place to do that. I think you have collaborated with Vives de Castro and Deborah.
Yes, but they all agree with this gentleman that Gaia is a typically Eurocentric figure. And I think it's true. But that's precisely why I find it interesting. It's the peace gesture. If we arrive and say, we live in Gaia, we have one little chance of being understood by people who don't live in Gaia because they have no idea about nature and all these things, and they have ignored it altogether, like Philippe Descola and so on. But at least we can begin. If we tell them, you live on Earth, on the globe, and we are now sunk into the same globalization movement, they say, well, you don't understand us. I mean, I don't know if it answers, but this is the link of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fascinating lecture and discussion. I would like to insist, perhaps, reiterate the question of concreteness. I think there were a lot of very exciting and interesting concepts, some of which we know, some of which we might not be very familiar with. But, you know, entanglement, multiplicity of agency, generativity, those are things that have been around a while. And so I would very much like to ask you, maybe the three panelists, to briefly try to connect, try to commit yourself to maybe a practice. And as the field of the exercise, I would want to know more about the question of digital culture and especially the question of the digital humanities. So what can you think of as concrete practices, maybe of research, maybe of teaching, for us that you think at the moment, right here and now, would help us to multiply agencies, would help us to entangle, disentangle, complicate agencies. I would like you to fill those very abstract and, dare I say, academic cliches with some concreteness.
Well, I'd like to know what is on your own page. Did you do my little exercise of selecting the three things that on attractor 1, attractor 2, and attractor 3? Okay, go ahead. I think you'd like to have the answer yourself, so I think it's better you to say.
One, of course, is precisely the question of digital culture.
Say, what was your answer?
What?
What was your answer to that?
My answer is, I mean, the question is, how do we place ourselves in terms of digital culture, in terms of digital humanities? Because from the perspective of people in academia, it, of course, is on the one hand, it's a threat. It's a tool of disciplining academia and disciplining the humanities. On the other hand, it might very well have opportunities which I'm perhaps not aware of. So I think rather than playing the game of insisting, and I understand that, there's a very good purpose for it, but insisting, so to speak, on remaining abstract, I would like to throw also the question back at you and say, where as an activist, in which kind of farm in Brittany have you encountered practices which you think at the moment in that concrete situation had what one might also have agonistic potential, or were constellations that at the moment, of course, allowed for another place for Gaia to emerge, however briefly?
Thank you.
I think you should answer those. They are to the whole panel. My connection with digital humanity is well known, I think, and I've done a lot of it, so I don't think I need to answer that.
Can I try to answer for you, or at least see if you wanted to go that way? That it seems to me that analysis is your form of practice. That you have this wonderful where you say that it's time to invert the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, where once upon a time with Marx, we should stop interpreting the world and start changing it. It seems to me that you are saying we should stop trying to change the world and start interpreting it in a particular way, that for that reason your diagramming, your cartooning becomes a form of practice, actually a form of politics. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I think I would be undiplomatic and say the accusation of abstraction is usually by people who have in their head even more simplified and abstract concept. So the accusation against academic talk on that score, don't cut any ice with me, because it's exactly the opposite, is that we, in this situation, which is witnessing half of the world going back to an identity politics, are, I think, largely limited by the numbers of concepts we can simultaneously entertain. And the fact of being able to entertain only two poles doesn't seem to be very good. So a work by academic, for academic, using not abstraction but speculative concept and figure is our duty. And if people find that abstract, so bad for them. I don't give a damn. It was not a more diplomatic thing. But sometimes diplomacy say, I won't discuss that silly question.
Well, of course, I mean, committing to a practice, being a researcher means, I guess, doing research. But what strikes to me here is that, in a way, we have been exploring also metaphors of not just being in the world, but also of seeing the world. The primary ones being either there is a view from the outside, as in globalization, or as a view from within, as in the local perspective. And it seems that maybe what the Earth perspective is about, or what a lot of research, what a lot of practices should be about now, is trying to understand what does it mean to take a perspective from between, whatever that is. In other words, if you look at the Earth, it's really interesting grabbing a piece of Earth or a hand of Earth in your hands. It's kind of the betweenness of it. It's the relations, it's the potentials for perspectives that seems to define that kind of materiality. And maybe these are some of the research practices that one could be looking at, not so much either the phenomenological from within or the classical scientific from the outside, but trying to develop kind of a language for what is it like to take a perspective from between. And how that translates to digital humanities, I have no clue at all.
But I think it's mostly a question of description. We are very bad at describing the situation that these gentlemen were rightly requesting. I mean, it's very striking to see a whole industry of agriculture completely paralyzed by this idea that there is only one vector, which is modernization, and every time sort of bio-agricultures come in, to be cornered into the local, the small, the non-scalable, and the archaic, and trying to fight out of that. So, of course, there are many very important things to do practically, but it's the role of intellectual, especially French intellectual, which are known for their abstraction, to the small layer of things. It's small, I mean, it's very small, very impalpable, which is what, when we are paralyzed by poisonous concept. And modernization is a poisonous concept, and it's the duty of those who have been infected to try to extract it. So that other concrete, although I don't know what it means, but concrete situations are actually give a sort of a leeway. Because if you paradise them by saying modernize your farm and go from 100 pigs to 1,000, where do you lead these people? And every single word is actually leading in, and people should never criticize concepts as abstract because they play such an important role.
There was a debate in Denmark a couple of weeks ago. The National Ethics Committee, yes, there is such a thing in this country, suggested that the state should impose taxes on meat as a way of reducing methane emissions. And the counter-argument, I remember, was that if you raise taxes on meat, making it more expensive to buy it, that would mean that the poor section of the population would not be able to eat meat. So the argument that defeated, reducing methane was that we actually, it's a social justice issue. We should not, do this because it would be socially unjust. And it strikes me that that is the kind of, I think you called them infernal alternatives, Isabelle, that they're the possibility of either continuing to emit methane into the atmosphere or social unrest because people don't eat meat. That seems to be of that same kind of logic of if you're not over here, you're back here.
Right.
But I think there is an argument here that, should we not only describe it, should we not also do something? What would be should we eat more meat or less?
No, I think that, just as William James, I think that ideas, abstraction do matter. You have just to take care of your abstractions. And William James' question, which is not an answerable question, but a matter of concern, was when you add such ideas, do you elevate the value of the real, or do you diminish it? So it's not a question you can answer because you cannot measure the value and all that, but it is a concern, which is a bit like Leibniz. Tell why here, dic curic. Don't give general reasons, but in this situation, what do you add or what do you subtract? And it seems to me that, I don't know, but it seems to me that the point is also to take into account what is already going on, since it was, I don't know a lot about digital humanities. What I know is that all those activist research about producing in another way food and all that would not have been possible without the web. It is there that they acquire their know-how, discuss, produce, and meet between them and learn from the failure and the attempt before. So I think that if there is a digital humanities, it's going on. And it's going on through the hands of amateur connoisseurship, learning to do together. To reclaim together things which have been forgotten and which come back new.
Should we try a question over here? Sorry.
I'm sorry. Well, actually, he was ahead of me, I think. But okay, but just very quickly, I was getting a little bit confused about the globalization issue. I've been going back a lot lately to Teilhard de Chardin and the concept of the noosphere. And if I look at lots of the rhetoric now about the Internet of Things and smart cities, it is a globalizing rhetoric, but it's a globalizing rhetoric which has I think, a great richness to it. And you seem to, Bruno especially, you were polarizing, the kind of global is bad, back to the land is bad, Gaia is good. But for me, there is a globalization, around that sort of vision, which is actually a rich and interesting one, which is giving agency, which is really dealing with distributed agencies in ways that active network theory has been talking about for the longest time.
Oh, yes. The third attractor has cities in it. It's not a countryside, I should have said. And big cities, and cities which are actually actively selected by thousands and thousands of architects, activists, and critique of what the future of a city will be. But so, of course, you're perfectly right. But we have the same, exactly the same question in architecture. And actually, I'm discussing next week with Philippe Ram, who is one of the most original redistributor of features of a city, of the future of the cities. And we could have talked about that in a more concrete term. So don't, in spite of what I said, and that's the danger of using the word Gaia, it's not a nice sort of countryside. It is a highly active, with lots of web. The problem is to select inside the many, many hyped about the future of the digital cities, how you select those three set of values which could help you to decide where you want to live. And there are many cities, connected, hyped city where I don't want to live. So the selection mechanism is exactly the same. But you're right to, thank you for allowing me to say that Gaia is not a countryside. Yes, it's made of big cities, but these cities have to be selected detail by detail. And what is so interesting in discussing with architects is that it's precisely the selection is extremely fine. It goes in every single details of what the city is about. And it's even its extension, the way it's built. I mean, architect is, in a way, the concrete discipline of what I was telling before. Also, for one simple reason is that cities are one of the most active politically in the climate discussion. And the network of city does a lot of interesting innovation as well.
Mm. Should we take another one from over this side?
This arrow you drew with the globe on one side and the land on the other, and the choice of going one way or the other. I'm just wondering, trying myself to figure out how to deal with this, because I've been rather interested in Jeffrey Herf's book about reactionary modernism. And if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, the first reference to globalism is Adolf Hitler. And of course, we all know Charlie Chaplin's dance with the globe. And at the same time, they were also the great people for land. And since we've been talking about Danish agricultural policy, our present government is the Farmers' Party, and they are going in for intelligent agriculture, which means agribusiness globalized. And at the same time, they're the most reactionary party.
Right.
Take the silver from the refugees, you know. So it seems to me that the global, in a way, the local is a creature of the global,
right,
and vice versa. So somehow or other, this new way of thinking has to get out of that somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I call the third attractor.
Yeah.
But you did more than anyone else to show that exactly that. The local is the local of the global.
Yeah.
So, of course, this is a polarity which is born in the same way. The question is to shift the compass in the other way requires not to reuse the local and the global. And this is why I think it was useful for us to do this little exercise. I say the local of the third category has nothing to do with the local of the third. And it's not a dialectic mechanism. So, and the case you mentioned is really interesting because in history, political history, agriculture has been used massively by a reactionary party, and especially in France, of course. So, yes, the difficulty is to, again, select. And Jeff's question was, how do you select in the hype about the city? And here's how to select in the reactionary themselves. They themselves have to be sort of selected layers by layers. But to be selecting, you need a selecting mechanism. You need a titration of some sort, a compass, and that's what I was trying to do. Mm. If not, you're always held up because people will say we are for the future of agriculture and agriculture raisonnée, which is one of the oxymoron we use in France often. We are. Oh yes, oh great, agriculture, global raisonnée agriculture. That's fabulous.
I have a little ethnographic observation, if you want it. It's when I read "We've Never Been Modern" from '93, it seemed, to me at least, that modernity, as you described it there, was never ending. It may be that we moderns were systematically misunderstanding ourselves, but it was a system that seemed to cope pretty well with its own contradictions and internal inconsistencies. It seems that in your later work, modernity is it's kind of already tilted. There's modernity is no longer what it used to be, or what it never was. There's a kind of the possibility of a third attractor is kind of in the wobbliness of the whole axis there. You've drawn it kind of as a slanty thing.
It's amusing you say that, because in the ZKM show we have asked Territorial Agency, our group of architects, to bring in what we call the Museum of Oil, and it's made of gigantic maps of land grab of oil industry in 5 different countries. But it's really big and very precise. But they tilted it by 15 degrees. So when you are when you are visiting this part of the show, you immediately imagine that whole thing is going to fall. And it's called the Museum of Oil because it's supposed to be what would be in the future parents bringing their kids looking at our period as a very strange and silly period. But of course, you don't know where it is in the future. Is it in the future, or is it actually the future will be the same?
Right.
So it's one of these things, the gestures you did is exactly this sort of mixture of figure, art form, and concept, which is my ways of moving in this zeitgeist. And that's why exhibition is so magnificent as a media form.
Can we take another question from Peter, perhaps? Ulrik up here. Peter has.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for a very stimulating talk. I have a kind of a comment and a question. The thing is, of course, this whole idea of the archaic and the future and this kind of modernization idea. Would you say also, I mean, viewed from a point of view of situatedness, well, we all impose archaism and futures all the time. So it's not really like it becomes substantiated as a very particular event in any case. So we all kind of, although, I mean, you are just to leave this kind of model, it seems like to be a very universal model anyway, but not universal in the sense that it's one we share because we always kind of make our own kind of archaism and futures. So, I mean, for me, for instance, I would consider Trump to be a very archaic figure, right? Although for others he might be a futurist. But that's kind of a way of maybe questioning some of the ideas of the model in that sense. And then secondly, and that's my question, is wouldn't you say that the problem really is that the idea of the attractor, that maybe the problem is that Gaia isn't able to be an attractor, that is in fact is the very problem, that Gaia doesn't seem to gather us or to summon us to the task at hand. So I mean, to stay with your thinking about the collective in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting, well, first of the commentary, because I think, on the contrary, everything is contemporary. And I think I learned that from anthropologists, that there is no archaic people, but there is no archaic reactionary either. They are always reinventing. And we all remember the mistake which was made in the 1930s when we said this is the archaic coming back. No, it was completely new, and it was very strong. So we should not say Trump. I think it would be a mistake to say Trump. Trump is contemporary and inventive, and it's not something, a resurgence of the past. It's unfortunately something which is neo-invented just as much as the activist world in which we need to live if we want to survive. Now, on the unattractiveness of Gaia, I think this is the key issue, which is, and I have many ways to enter into it, but the one I did it in the Gifford and now in Facing Gaia is the theological origin of it. Why is it that for people who have been in the tradition of Christianity and we say the Western, this indifference to whatever could be called the old, natural world. And there is a series of theological arguments which could be made about that. So it's not, but one of them, which I think is, I sort of alluded to in nature, in this lecture, is that it is linked, I think, to this idea that whenever we talk about Gaia, it's about the lived world. And we have not been able to reabsorb as much of the sciences of Gaia. And the mistake on Lovelock for me is really interesting. As soon as he uttered this argument about the connectedness, but not the holistic, but the entanglement of a life form, it was immediately shifted to a very traditional definition of one organism and a sort of traditional neo-mixtures of things. I mean, horrible view really. So, and that's also what happened to the ecology movement. My question is why it is the same as yours, and I have no answer to that. Why is it that what we live in, it's as if we were not on Earth. We modern are not on Earth. So this is why the news coming to us about climate, soil, fish, etc., well, yeah, it's interesting. But it doesn't concern us because we are not on Earth. And and that's, this gentleman say, I was abstract, but we are all more abstract. Because being abstract means we are not of this world. And there are a lot of theological arguments, complex, and I have no time to get into it. My impression of a perfect quietism with which we hear about all this news about ecology is that we are not of this world. It doesn't concern us. We are somewhere else. We are in another place. That's the only explanation I have. It's not a good one. And that's why it's so difficult to re-land, to re-ground. Where would we be if we were re-ground? We have no experience. You cannot re-ground in the res extensa, which is supposedly the reductionist view that scientists give us, which is not true, of course. But where would you be if you were in the res extensa? You would be in the complete utopia, an idealist version of matter. So the difficulty of being materialist is, I think, the key thing. And here I should cite, because I have not talked about it, the Pope Francis encyclical. Because the originality of this encyclic is precisely to say, we ground. You Christian, we ground, not look here, look down. And the looking down, with this very important link between poverty, inequality, and ecology, was, in my view, the first really efficient gesture by an authority about what it would mean to reground. But apart from that, I never heard anyone saying this concern. No, it's not doesn't concern. It's about nature. Mm-hmm. No one lives in nature. The moon is in nature. The sun is in nature, not us. So what happens on nature doesn't concern us. It's as simple as that.
There is an entire discussion about the resurgence of religion in contemporary thinking and time that we do not have time for. In fact, we're out of time. So all of you who have questions, I'm sorry, we'll have to end here in hopefully a not too depressing place. I would like you to put your hands together for Isabelle Stengers, for Andreas ROEPSTORFF, and in particular for Bruno Latour. Hey, Hans. Was denn der? And every cloud has a silver lining. It's been too hot today. I'm so sorry. I hate people who say that when the weather is warm, it's global warming. But I nevertheless have something here that is perhaps a sign.
I knew you were doing this.
A sign of things to come.
I knew you were doing this. Yeah.
Denmark is growing wine at the northern limits of possibility.
I don't want it.
Well, you should have it.
I don't want even to hear about it.
Because Denmark is the new France. It's the new Bourgogne. And I've given you here, it's won many prizes.
Wow.
And also for you, And typically of Danish products, it has a map of Denmark on the front, just so that you're not, in doubt about where it's from. Thank you very much.
This is the most depressing gift I ever get.
There is actually wine from France, I think, out there if you want a glass to cool down after this hot afternoon. Thank you so much for coming.
So.